Peter Meyer, President and Publisher of the Cape Cod Times. Thank you. Folks, good to see you all. I think what I'll do just quickly, I know there's a little bit of motion here, but I thought this might be a good opportunity to remind you of one of my favorite movies, and maybe a famous line in that favorite movie, and that was Wall Street with Michael Douglas. And he said lunch is for wimps. So if you're thinking about lunch, just forget about that for about 1 more hour as we bring our next panel up here. And what we'll do is get some reaction from folks that, I was going to say, where the rubber hits the road, really, in terms of labor, young families, regionalization. These folks live and breathe it each and every day. But at the same time, our last panel lives and breathes it for sure. So these folks will be prepared to add to the conversation. You know, one of the things that we talked about, I'm president and publisher of the Cape Cod Times, by the way, and I'm on the volunteer group of Cape Cod Focus. And one of the things that we wonder about is, how does this happen? Regionalization, for example. Who's going to do it? Who's going to take the lead? Who makes these things happen? That's why it was interesting to hear from Linda in Franklin County and how things moved forward there. And as I sat here in the audience listening to what's happening in the labor market and what the prospects are for Cape Cod and regionalization activities on the Cape, I had to think that, you know what, it's the folks in this room that make things happen. Reminds me of the saying, the world is run by those that show up. And you folks are showing up, you folks are engaged, and you're making it happen. It's up to all of us here, really, to reach out beyond this group and engage those other folks that should be showing up, that can actually make things happen. And as maybe just a little bit of levity, when you show up, you never really know what it is you're going to learn. And I've learned quite a bit this morning. I don't know how many folks know Maggie Van Skyver, but she sat down next to me shortly after the program started, and she slipped me a little note, and it said, this is the letter, by the way, it said, Peter, your wife is getting a haircut today. Make sure you mention it when you go home tonight. I mean, there's a little piece of information I had no clue whatsoever coming into this today that I was going to pick up. And think about how important that is. The only thing that could ruin this is if anybody here mentions this to my wife before I tell her how good her hair looks when I get home tonight. There was really a lot of information that we can react to, and we have a panel here today to react. So what I'm going to do is just tell you quickly who's on the panel, and then perhaps still go through sort of quickly to give you a little bit more color about who they are and why the topics that we talk about today are important to them. And then the concept is for us to have a lively exchange, really, of sharing information and reaction to what's happening on Cape Cod and this whole concept of the concepts of regionalization, jobs on the Cape, and finding ways to keep young folks. So on our panel, Peter Carlson is president of Nuion. And maybe if you just raise your hand when I say your name so people can put a face to a name as you speak. Matt Kay is the owner of Wellfleet Seafood. Paul Netswicki is the executive director of the Cape Cod Commission. Carolyn Cragen is the superintendent of Harwich Public Schools. Bill Doherty is the county commissioner, and I'm sure he has more to share with us still. And there's Larry Cole, who is a Harwich selectman. So welcome, folks. Paul, perhaps you can start to react to what you've heard today and add some color if you would.
Well, thank you, Peter. There's a lot of bad news we heard today. The worst news from my perspective is that at the age of 44, I'm no longer considered young. That's disappointing. But a lot of interesting things came out of the survey up front, and especially interested in the issue of confidence of young professionals in their government and its relation to taxes. And I don't think it's uncommon when you look at some of the other national survey data out there as it relates to Generation X and Generation Y and their faith that there'll be anything left in the Social Security system once the baby boomers are done with it. So I think it starts to sort of churn around a little bit like that. And then the obvious relationship between the cost of housing, not just affordable housing by definition, but the cost of housing on the Cape and its juxtaposition to the average wage that we pay down on the Cape. So it's that connection of jobs and housing that is still important. But what really sort of gets me thinking of the issues around regionalization, resource sharing, however we've begun to discuss it, and it is the focus of Cape Cod Focus. And recently with the economic implosion, I think I can say this because I've got 20 years of experience or so in and around legislative bodies, that legislative bodies and elected officials are always in a hurry to write that press release about how much money they put out there to save you, and oftentimes that number looks pretty big until you break it down. And I think that's the experience we had with the DLTA funds that Lieutenant Governor was making a big deal about. That's $2 million statewide, and it's for district local technical assistance to the regional planning agencies. We had that money last year. It was available for expedited permitting planning. They have expanded to include regionalization. Looks at regionalization this year, but there are another 6 million residents of the Commonwealth when you cross the bridge, and $2 million doesn't really go that far. So it breaks down to $155,837 to be somewhat exact. And so we are going to use that to the best of our ability. And I'm very heartened to see that there's a lot of efforts at regionalization that have been taking place. We want to support those with those funds, and we want to encourage some new ones. Additionally, this morning, I heard from some people that were somewhat excited about what they understood to be a $9 billion component of the federal bailout bill that was going to be put into water or wastewater infrastructure. But we tell you $9 billion when you break it down nationwide, doesn't go very far either. And on just sort of a pro rata, per capita evaluation, that might mean, in a best case scenario, if everything's apportioned equally, $9 million for the Cape. And if anyone's got a $9 million wastewater project, pretty sure they have. Clearly, some of the estimates for what it's going to cost to extend sewers on the Cape to clean up the wastewater problem approach that number that is being used nationally. So that's somewhat of a concern. But the county provides a lot of regional services, and we need to do more. And there's been a lot of talk about efficiencies from police and fire and schools. But I want people to stay focused on the future, because the challenges of the Cape in the next 25 years are infrastructure challenges, and the challenges of clean water, wastewater, the challenges of energy infrastructure, and the challenges of telecommunications infrastructure if we're going to build a sustainable peninsula into the future. And those are challenges that towns cannot afford to do alone. And so those are the future challenges that are very expensive challenges that I believe we're going to need a regional solution to. So those are my thoughts, Peter. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So, anybody else ready to jump in and let us know your thoughts?
Well, Harwich has been heavily represented, so as...
I'm not sure they can hear you. Into the mic, please.
Harwich has been officially heavily represented, so I'm not going to represent Harwich. I'm not here as a selectman. I'm a retired economist, and I'm very pleased that my plan is to define benefits as not a 401k. With respect to the, what I'd like to do is talk about some of the things that got us here, and whether the trends that Peter Franchese has been identified as far back as 2003 when he first appeared on the Cape are likely to continue, and what the implications are. Is it likely that our population on the Cape in total is going to be stagnant and not continue to grow? I don't think so. I think it will continue to grow, perhaps slowly, more slowly than in the past, but I can't see the population, the total population, in this county declining. This is still a very attractive area for retirees, and who has been retiring here since 1995 were people who were born from 1930 on, which was a thin Depression and World War II cohort, and now we have the baby boomers starting to retire, and if an even smaller fraction of them select the Cape than previous cohorts, it will still be a large number. Like the retirees are going to continue to come. Second home building is going to continue to happen. In fact, in Harwich, it's actually turned the corner a little bit, where summer homes or year-round homes are beginning to be a slightly larger fraction of our total number of homes. What about the departure of early retirees that Peter pointed out? I think this is perhaps a short-term phenomenon. We'll know a few years down the road, but by early retirees, he didn't mean people who retired early. He meant people in the early years of retirement after they've been here for a while. I think the evidence is that a lot of those folks are people who enjoyed the run-up in housing prices and took the money and ran. I think the other trend that he identified, the loss in the working age population who took their children with them, is likely to continue if we don't address the housing situation, the gap between what housing costs and what people can afford based on the incomes that are paid, that are in the jobs here. I was not a labor economist. I've been reading something about the relationship between educational attainment and job success and economic development and so on, but we have a labor economist perhaps still in the room, so I'm going to be careful about what I say in that area. Look, you know, some people like to quote Milton Friedman because he said if you pay for unemployment, you'll have more of it. Well, he's right, but Milton also said that what poor people need is money. And in consequence, he invented the negative income tax. Well, what the working poor need is higher incomes. But we've got two ways that we can address the housing gap. We can try to do something about lowering the cost of housing, and we can try to do something about raising incomes. Now, what can government do with respect to lowering the cost of housing? We've got all kinds of programs going on in the workforce or affordable housing area, and we donate land, and we can and the permitting process gets simplified if it's a 40B. But there are things that we can do in the realm of smart growth. And for disclosure purposes, I'm a member of the Business Roundtable, so this is part of their point of view, which I share. If we increase the density of our village centers and permit multiple unit structures to be built, or apartments over shops and so on, we can perhaps, that's one way of lowering the cost of housing units. As Paul has mentioned, we've got infrastructure problems ahead of us, wastewater being a big one. We have denser living areas, village centers, and we stop the sprawl and outlying areas. And these are the things that can be cured by zoning changes. They don't necessarily have to be cured only that way, but government can set the environment in which the market works. And greater density reduces the cost of infrastructure and delivering services. On the incomes, so there are things we can do on the cost side. On the income side, what can you do to raise incomes? Well, somehow over time you can change out the distribution of jobs, the job structure that you have. You would have to attract different kinds of industries that we don't now have that would pay more. I think one of the things that's happening in that regard, and will be abetted if the Open Cape broadband activity succeeds, is we have significant numbers of people working on the Cape because they like to live here, and they only have to go to Boston occasionally or to wherever they telecommute, can work at home, and they have to have access to an airport. Is that going to be large numbers? No, but we'll take any of them that we can get. So the other thing is, then how do you go out and attract businesses? How do you get them to relocate here? Well, a colleague of Professor Clark, or colleagues in another center at Northeastern have studied the relocation decision and found that what attracts or what businessmen decide to relocate, to expand, to start a new business someplace is heavily influenced by the quality of local services, including education, a permitting process that doesn't get in the way, a labor force that's, shall I say, not too uppity, or at least where there's not a tradition of labor problems, and tax rates or tax burdens that are not too high. Now, how can you provide high-quality services at the local level and keep taxes down? Well, the answer from the folks at Northeastern was you need revenue sharing from the state because they have opportunities to raise funds that we don't. We may have to look at increasing some of our own revenues. So other places go out, you know, and sell their area as relocation. And whether we want to get into that business or not and give incentives and tax breaks and so on to move here is something we have to think about.
Larry, I think you set that up. Actually, I think you set that up very nicely for either Peter or Matt to tell us from a business perspective. What do you think of what you heard today?
I would like to chime in on that because a couple of my points that came out of
Can you hear him?
Can you hear me? And I'm speaking more from my role as chairman of the Tech Council here in the Cape, and as well as an entrepreneur. But I was encouraged by the numbers about the 3.1% growth in professional business services nationwide, but also the fact that we have growth in this area on the Cape. So how do we promote that? How do we encourage that? And I don't think it's going out and recruiting companies. I think it's growing your own. It's encouraging entrepreneurship. It is having people start businesses, take those telecommuters, and when they get laid off from those big company jobs, take them and provide incentives for those people to start new companies. And that is how you grow jobs, because the number one employer is going to be the small business, and it's going to be small entrepreneurs that are going to be growing into small to medium-sized companies over time. That is a proven strategy, and if you look around the Cape today, look at all the companies that aren't here anymore. You know, we're talking about the Software 2000, people like that, because those aren't the employers that you want. You want the smaller guys that are starting out, and that's I just want to answer Nicole's comments on that.
Well, what's your reaction to the stat of 22%? I think it was 22% expect to leave Massachusetts in the next 5 years, and this is of the younger population.
Well, as an import.
And how do you think that's going to impact you?
So I consider myself an import, right? So I came to school here,
right,
and never left. And I like the concept of the boomerang. So when you take people, they're leaving, that's great. You know what? Let them leave, go get some skills, come back, and start great companies. That's another phenomenon that we should encourage. And we should say that if people want to go over the bridge, I'm trying to see a bunch of students right there too. So you guys are probably, you're heading off the bridge, over the bridge, come on back after you've gone and done some great things, come back and start great companies. That's what I said.
Matt?
Thank you. So my company, the Wealthy Harbor Seafood Company, has a wholesale fish operation, 2 restaurants, and in the height of the summer season we employ about 120 people. Year-round, we try to employ 2 or 3. And there's this drastic change between the summer and the winter season. We are in a constant struggle to grow our business. One of the biggest challenges that we face is how to get in touch with these qualified year-round residents that live here that may be looking for a job. I also think since I was asked to sit on this panel, a lot has changed just in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I think we're all sort of digesting that as things are moving forward. Even the data that's on that board, I think, is going to be much different within 2 months from now than it is right now. So I guess, you know, my general comments on today's discussions, and there's so much. This has been an amazing opportunity just to see how much is going on with regionalization. You know, I think we could pick some of these topics and spend a whole day on each one of them, which might be something in the future. But generally, I was very surprised at the number of available workforce above the age of 55. And I think that that's a resource that a business like mine needs to pay more attention to and needs to, in a sense, curtail their business or the positions that they offer to those people so that it's a part-time job, maybe it's only 20 hours a week, their direct supervisor is someone that's of their age or older. And I think that there's a cultural thing that we need to adjust to as a young business trying to hire older people. I shouldn't say older people, I should say older workforce. But I think that that's some of the struggles that we face as a small business on the Cape.
Yes, Bill.
Last night I was over the bridge and act as an academic fellowship class in college. So with the group that we were looking at, I did an anecdotal survey, and I said, what would it take to get you to move to the Cape after you graduate? These were juniors, 20-year-olds. And some of the remarks were insightful, especially the guy that said, well, look, my grandparents live down there. It's filled with old people. You know, why would I want to go down there?
Bill, I'm not sure they can hear you. Just a little closer to the mic.
My grandparents are down there. It's filled with old people. Why would I want to move down there? But, you know, that makes a strength in terms of that particular segment because, you know, as the previous speaker said, you know, there's a labor force segment that's available within that population. Another person said that it's a great place to go for the summer, but I don't want to live there year-round because there's nothing that goes on a year-round basis that supports me, which keys into what Dr. Cole was saying with regard to you need to have a greater density of housing that would support people that are coming in to develop starter jobs. The fear of apartments is, you know, is something you have to put behind you because you're either going to have to increase the wages that you pay municipal employees to get them to come here, or you're going to have to provide some type of housing that is appropriate for the kind of wages that you can afford to pay them. So apartments seem to be the answer. Garden apartments are part of that. The issue on apartments, and Dr. Cole knows this because it's ongoing in Harwich, it takes about 7 to 8 years to get an apartment that even built on town land, to get it up and running and get it replaced. We have another 12 units within a year or so, but that has been an elephant-like gestation that's producing some little mouse kids.
Thank you for that.
What we need, and in the paper today we have the thing on homelessness and the commitment that the county commissioners have made to supporting that. We need 250 units to support the chronically homeless across Cape Cod in order to address that. If we concentrate people in shelters, we're going to continue to put a burden on individual town centers to do that, and that burden is not going to be met. Other anecdotal information from the surveys came that the person that was on the survey that was from Nepal said, is that a safe place to live? It's very important to have a safe place to live. And I think that that's another concern that people have, is if we're encouraging them to come here, it has to be safe. And of course there will be other things. If I'm graduating from a business school, I want to go where there's opportunity. And opportunity means that there's an excitement, that there are people of my age, there are people that understand where we're coming from. I think your comment with regard to go over the bridge, find out what the road is like, then bring all that experience back and help us, help us establish the road. I think that's where we go. So with that, I would say that we have great opportunities, and I don't think that we have really dug into, optimizing, or even begun to figure out how to do that. The success in the past has been 1 to 2 people starting up an entrepreneurial kind of organization that grows. Back office in Harwich, I think, is an example of that, and we have had others. If that's what the formula for success is, that's the kind of environment we have to provide. The idea of having smokestack industries recruited to come down to the Cape is not something that's acceptable by anybody. But the idea of encouraging the 1 and 2 for some firms, I think, that develop the livable wage incomes that we need. I think is whether it's the direction that we can take, and I think it's doable without a lot of government and external support, because that depends upon the attitude and motivation of the people that are doing it.
Thanks, Bill. We'll take some questions in just a few minutes after we hear from Carolyn. But you raised a couple of interesting points, and when we do questions, maybe Steve Abbott and Gary Sheehan, our co-leaders for Cape Cod Focus, can join us on stage and answer a couple of questions. Because I'm going to have one for Gary, and that's this thought that young people say there's nothing going on Cape Cod, and I'm just curious what his group does for entertainment and how they feel about that, because I've heard it many times. Not too many details on the entertainment, but just a sense for what that's all about. But right now we're going to hear from Carolyn Cragen, who's the superintendent of the Harwich schools. If you could give us a reaction, and then just if you could touch on the what's happening in Maine, that would be great.
Actually, I'd like to touch on what's happening in Harwich and Chatham as well, because that question was raised earlier, and I can give you some information about the carrots and the sticks, and how the whole process is evolving with the supports from the state. But I have to begin by saying that when I arrived in the beautiful town of Harwich in 2006 from a regional district on the south coast, I certainly never anticipated being in the thick of these discussions. And I think it's given me a perspective that is particularly useful as we look at the issue from a couple of perspectives. And I have to say, in reflecting on what I've heard today, there are two areas that I'd like to speak to. The first is the role of schools in the encouragement of a commitment to a geographic area. And the other is the process of regionalization as it relates to the schools. In the Mass Inc. survey, there were a couple of references that were striking to me as an educator. One of them was that 93% of the young adults who were polled still believe that their children will be more successful than they are. And if you play history back a little bit to the greatest generation and the people who survived the Depression, as my parents did, the hope for something better for children was always connected to education as the entry portal to the great American dream and to a hope for equity of opportunity, regardless of what your background was, that you would be able, through education, to rise to a higher level. We recognize, I think, in most cases, in terms of the real estate values, that strong schools contribute to that kind of a demographic attraction, that families who want the best for their children want the best schools for their children. The other part that's interesting was the importance of roots in keeping people in an area, and schools provide a strong aspect of that process, especially for the young adult professionals with children who will find the kinds of opportunities that the schools offer for them, not the least of which, in fact, in some instances, are entertainment forms. The local sports activities and the drama programs are, for many people, the kinds of activities that bring them together in a way that creates the connectedness of the small town image that we in New England like to see for ourselves. So, from the perspective of what schools can do for the Cape demographic and keeping and attracting younger professionals for the workforce, I think those are really important areas. And it leads to the issue of regionalization, because one of the things that has been striking to me as I've worked with the process of how we approach the regionalization assessment that Harwich was tasked with about a year ago by the Massachusetts School Building Authority, is that if we look at regionalization as purely a process of economy of scale, and we miss the fact that it can also be a process of economy of opportunities, then we really fail to see the potential for the success of regionalization, especially as we look at an area with a declining enrollment typically in the schools. If you look at the smaller communities on the Cape and the declining numbers and project what the time and effort of educational professionals and community leaders is invested in over the next decade or so, it can be invested either in improving the opportunities for students, or it can be invested in survival of individual, narrowly defined school districts. What we've discovered in looking at the Chatham-Harwich option is that by combining resources, the opportunities for students increase. And the opportunities for students increase, the attractiveness of the community through the strengths of the schools also increases. So we're working very closely, the superintendent of Chatham, Marion Lanzo, and I have had a number of meetings where we have actually lined our numbers up against one another's to see what a Chatham-Harwich district would look like. As it happens, it would look very much like a district that I worked in, which still retained the core values that I see in this area of the small community, but with opportunities that will be enhanced by the number of students available for programs like the advanced placement academic programs, foreign language programs, athletic and arts programs are all enhanced by a larger student population, because that increases the level of discourse in an AP class. It increases the number of players available for a team or a dramatic activity. All of those are benefits, and those are ways that we can strengthen what we are able to offer to the community in the schools. We have been working also to develop the grant that was mentioned earlier by Mr. Wilkins, and we are working on a grant for the two towns that will help do some of the number crunching and the analysis of what the model might look like, that will give both of those communities a stronger sense of what Chatham-Harwich region could be. We're also involved in a grant that Mike Rodone has begun through the Nauset district, not only to address the larger issues that that district faces with so many elementary school regions at this point, districts at this point, but what the Lower Cape might look like in the future. So I really see this as a kind of a short-term and long-term planning process. We need to look at what we can do at the moment that will be best for students. The process of regionalization is not a rapid process, however, and that may answer the question that the gentleman over here had about superintendents. It takes a while to create the agreement that two communities would need, or more, to have a region, to develop logistics, to analyze what the facilities would be. It's a long-term process, and that's the grant that will support the process for Chatham and Harwich. The other thing that I should mention in terms of the staffing issue, we have already met in Harwich with the Department of Education's representative for regional school districts and questioned her at some length about what the advantages and disadvantages are. And one of the things that's important to recognize, if you have a large region, if you have Robbins-Barnstable region, is that you may have one superintendent, but you would probably have a number of other members of middle management. You would have assistant superintendents, for example, that neither Chatham nor Harwich has at the moment. In fact, Harwich, for example, has a half-time director of curriculum. Chatham has no director of curriculum. If you bring the two districts together and create a position of a director of curriculum or an assistant superintendent, that actually is an increase in staffing, but it's one that would benefit students. So we are looking at the process as one of what are the opportunities that we can enhance for students, and how do we do that in a way that is supportive of everyone in the community, and in a way that we hope will benefit the larger Cape area by creating a model.
Well, thank you for that. What I read in the Cape Cod Times was that the Maine school district was, well, from 290 school districts to 80. Can you shed some light on that process?
As a matter of fact, my doctoral program at BC, my roommate was a Maine superintendent, so she has had the impact of that already. That was an externally imposed process, and it has been done for very similar reasons, for economies of scale, to be more efficient in delivery of services to students. And there has been some fallout from doing it in that way. I think I'm far more comfortable with what we've been doing so far, which is to do it from the ground up, to recognize the advantages and to try to build a system of sustainable excellence for the communities that we represent.
What does externally imposed mean exactly?
The state said you will reduce this. It was not something that the communities decided at all.
I think it was Robin Wilkins that had said, you know, what we really should be doing is looking at what our school district or other municipal functions look like 10 years from now, put a committee together, create a plan, and work that plan over the next 10 years. Now, is that something that you see as being feasible for the school districts? And then maybe we can talk about water quality, wastewater treatment next.
Not only is it feasible, I think it's inevitable. I think if we don't plan for what we envision school districts to be on the Cape in the future, that it will be a continued struggle. And that's a struggle that doesn't need to happen. I think the conversations that we've begun are very healthy and will help to move us forward. The other thing I did want to mention is the sticks and carrots. From the perspective of what the state has been willing to do for us, in addition to the grants that they've made available to help with the kinds of consultant services that are necessary in the regionalization process, they have also added a little bit of a carrot/stick through the Massachusetts School Building Authority, that if a new region constructs a new school, they will add 6 percentage points to the reimbursement. And that's one of the first steps that, in a very concrete way, the state has taken to back up the initiative that was floated in the Governor's Readiness Project. So I think we're starting to see some positive impetus in that direction. I have had a number of conversations with our contact at MSBA and have shared with her the kind of progress that we've been making in conversations. And they've been very supportive and offered to facilitate conversations between communities who are interested in mutualization. So we're starting to see, I think, a little bit more support from the state.
Thank you, Bill. Maybe you can touch on how does a group get the clout to create a plan like this? Who participates, and will it mean anything to the participating towns outside of a voluntary basis?
I'd suggest to you that the wastewater collaborative model was one in which we went town by town to talk to the individual elected officials about the value of getting together to address the management planning issues that were involved. That took some time. However, when we came to the end of the process of getting the participation of the towns, we had a stronger organization. At that point, we then had an organization that began to apply some of the things that were intended in the ordinance that was established together. And Paul sitting here was the first director of that, and we gave way to Gottlieb. Now you're back on the collaborative, so perhaps you could speak directly as to what the next step was after the engagement, after the acceptance of the plan. Now we're in the application phase. Perhaps this might be insightful as far as what this process could be here.
And the Water Protection Collaborative process was leadership by the county. It was a voluntary process. They went around, they sold it to all 15 towns. I was the assistant town manager at the town of Barnstable at the time, so I chaired that organization for its first year. And really the charge was to hire an executive director, and we brought in Andy Gottlieb. And I think our success in working with legislative delegation, in particular Senator O'Leary on the SRF bill, that's success beyond our wildest dreams, quite frankly. So those kind of voluntary organizations work in building consensus and probably developing a plan. I would not confuse that kind of voluntary organization with an organization that would be capable of anything on an operational level.
Paul, while you have the mic, and switching gears just a little bit, and maybe this is of interest to Peter Carlson and Matt. Hey, how do we build high-quality apartments across the Cape that would both be in keeping with what we expect in construction, I guess, look and feel on the Cape, yet provide the housing necessary for younger folks to stay on Cape Cod?
Well, I think we do that by designating economic centers and by streamlining the regulatory process in those economic centers to allow businesses to go in there to encourage mixed use. We've done some of that in certainly in the Hyannis Growth Incentive Zone. We're working in the Growth Incentive Zone at Dennisport right now with some similar principles. We look forward to getting to work in Yarmouth soon. We need tools in order to do that, though. We have a growth incentive tool now that requires a lot of planning by the towns, and I think that that's appropriate. But we have a regional policy plan. We have Chapter H ordinance that'll be in front of the Assembly of Delegates that will allow us to raise and lower thresholds based on a simple application by the town. And we have a limited review process, all really outcomes of the 21st Century Task Force that reviewed the Cape Cod Commission's mission. And I would like to get all three of those done as soon as possible so that we can get to work, because I think that has already gone a long way. Our land use vision map and the process associated with it has started that discussion about where you want to have additional development, redevelopment, and where you can have the ability to really stimulate your local commercial tax base by withdrawing regulation in order to get some of that new growth in your tax base so that you can afford the infrastructure that we're all going to be mandated to build over the next 25 to 50 years. And so it's a radically different approach. And we need to start thinking about planning in 21st century mentality and not in a Cold War mentality. And we have to get away from sprawl. We have to stop building housing for baby boomers. And we have to start thinking about a new paradigm and how we're going to encourage that kind of design. And I think we can do it in these economic centers. But it's going to require change. And change is difficult.
Mac has a few thoughts on that.
Well, I think that's exactly right. I think one of the most important applications of that process would be to really keep the local towns informed and work with them rather than trying to impose something on top of them. I know in Wellfleet, Wellfleet should sort of have this tradition of being standoffish and you won't tell us what to do. And that's because there's usually not enough information given ahead of time. And I think Ira Wood was here earlier. He understands as a selectman how important it is to deal with these tiny little issues at the very local level to inform the people of what change is coming, why it should come, and how it will affect them. I think just to hand the townspeople a document and say, let's vote on this, it would never pass, no matter how good the opportunity is. So I think that that's a very crucial part of every even regionalization, as Ira said. And to go back real quickly on that point with the schools and how it affects business, and one of the questions I was asking myself as I was looking at this agenda was why are these two things really paired side by side? And I think it could be a real stimulus if the school system on Cape Cod was an attraction for young families, if it was a reason for them to move here. We're looking for reasons for people to come here. Opportunity is one of them, but when you have a young family, I actually have two kids. One of them is in the Wellfleet school system, and one of the reasons I wanted to be there was because of the opportunity for my kids. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for the regionalization and small business to work together. And I really didn't think there was. I've sat on the Wellfleet Finance Committee for a number of years, and regionalization has popped up numerous times. And it never crossed my other side of the small business mentality of how do these things intertwine with each other, and how can they complement each other. And I think that would be a good discussion in the future for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. A couple of years ago, I read a story in the Wall Street Journal where Kalamazoo, Michigan created this program where they would pay for college for kids that went through the public high school, grades 9 through 12. And if they spent less than 4 years there, they would prorate it. But it was a business initiative, really, and somebody with a lot of money that seeded this program to attract people to the area and to work in the area. It was all educational based, and I think it's working for them. So you're absolutely right. It's maybe something Cape Cod would consider as well. We're going to take some questions from the audience right now, so if we could maybe get queued up for that. And I'll just ask very quickly of each of our panel, 20 seconds or less, okay? We all know that change takes a sense of urgency, okay, in order to be successful. Really need a sense of urgency. Do you think that there's a sense of urgency to move forward with the issues that we've talked about today at an aggressive pace? Or are we going to be talking about this for another 30 years? Again, just quickly.
Well, I'll start real quickly. I think to go back to the Cape Cod Young Professional Survey, I was actually one of the respondents in that survey, and I've given up on government trying to help the housing situation. I think, you know, housing is so important to our labor pool, and it was talked about, been talked about. So there's a sense of urgency, but I'm not relying on that on a solution anymore. I'm going to look for my own solution. I'm not sure what that is, but it's almost like that sense of urgency has come and gone.
So you don't feel that everybody else shares that same sense of urgency that
I think everybody else does, but I think it's just been talked about. I don't see anything really concrete happening.
Okay, so that's one to go. Bill, what do you got for it?
Sustainable increase in apartments, it has to come from the private sector, not the public sector. The public sector can do things as far as subsidized housing. The great thrust has to come from the private sector. The private sector has to see that there's a profit opportunity in doing it.
Do you think there's a sense of urgency in the private sector to make things happen or not?
No. Listening to two members of this panel saying that they need to have a labor force and they need to have affordable housing for that. And I think that urgency, if you're really serious about developing a population in that age group that stays here, you have to have the housing that supports that. And I think there is a profit opportunity because if the housing is there and to support the jobs that are there, then we're going to have the long-term viability of all of this. And I think the growth incentive zones is intended to create that kind of environment to support that.
Well, Peter Carlson, is there a sense of urgency to make things happen now?
Absolutely, and it's going to because it's coming from the sense of urgency from the economy. I mean, all of these people that are losing their jobs, those people are, just like in the late 80s, early 90s, all those people got laid off in a bunch of companies that went south in New England. The same thing is going to happen now, and all of those people who are out in the streets looking for jobs, or better yet, creating their own jobs, and that's what the sense of urgency is going to come from.
That's encouraging.
I believe the Chinese symbol for chaos is a combination of the symbol for danger and opportunity. And I think that's where we're at, and I think there is a sense of urgency. I feel that sense. We're doing it, and we're trying to set the table so that we're ready for the recovery when it comes. And the cautionary tale I have is I'm on a lot of different boards and committees around the Cape, and it seems to be the same 10 people on every committee. And so the public needs to feel that sense of urgency too. You need to get involved because it's the same 10 people, and they're really nice people, and they really have the best interests of the Cape in mind. But unfortunately, if those are the only people involved, then it only takes a handful of people to stop some really important initiatives, and that would be tragic.
Point well taken, Carolyn.
I would agree that there is a sense of urgency, and to me it comes from the fact that if we act now, we are able to shape our destiny in a way that we see as positive and productive. If we wait, the kinds of regional efforts will be done out of desperation, and it takes a long time to make institutional change happen. If we don't begin now, that window of opportunity will be closed.
So, Larry, as an economist, as a collector,
I think I see a selective sense of urgency, certainly in the area of reducing the costs of government and trying to increase efficiency, maintain the quality of services that we deliver without increasing taxes. And I think there's receptivity to do things about housing, but again, a lot of people are in favor of affordable housing except the specific project that gets proposed. There's another area in which I see not only a lack of a sense of urgency, but opposition to a future development that I think should be occurring, and that is, when you look at the resources that we have bogs for growing cranberries. We have the ocean and its beaches and the fisheries. We know what condition the fisheries are in. We have a hospitality industry that depends on the ocean, and we're addressing the water quality. The other resource we have, a natural resource is wind, and somehow or other, there is enormous opposition. I've been trying to do something in Harwich since 2002 on a town committee at the direction of the selectmen to look at erecting a wind turbine on town-owned land so we could cut our electricity bill. And the other day I read in the local paper that one of our planning board members wonders, what's the rush that we now have a wind turbine bylaw coming up, possibly for next May. And just a parting shot in that regard, I have a real problem with people of my generation who come down here to retire and croak eventually, having a whole lot of say about what this place is going to look like in the future. When did we give a veto on aesthetics for those of us who are on the way out?
Well, with that, Bob, let's take a few questions, and I'll remind you that Steve and Gary from Cape Cod Focus are here, who could field some questions as well. And I'm sure Wendy Northcross would be willing to take some too if we expand beyond our panel. So let's fire away.
Well, I wanted to thank you all for coming. I came to this event because, number one, it was an economic summit, and the economy is a critical issue right now. The other thing that got my interest was, what's this guy doing in this picture that the brochure had? You got this guy standing there, and he's staring out at the ocean. Well, I thought that was quite profound, because if you really look at Cape Cod, the crisis that we're in is because of our own popularity to some degree. And it's also because we've been reactive in nature versus being proactive in act. And what I mean is that I can remember when the Barnstable police would take my mother's horse from Main Street and bring it back to the house because we could get out and go wandering down Main Street. That doesn't happen today. However, the growth that we have buckled under has been the biggest problem. And we have been reactive to that growth, which has resulted in the sprawl, the rural isolation, as someone put it. The fact is that the reason Cape Cod is Cape Cod is because of the ocean. The oceans are in trouble, we all know that. I'm pleased to see someone from the seafood industry and the ocean industry here, because in truth, that's one of the points of the future here on Cape Cod. We have to accentuate our strengths, and we have to take advantage of those. Not just concentrate on trying to keep the damage from getting worse. The idea of the renewable energy spectrum is a tremendous opportunity, but we have to do it right. The key here is in growing it locally. You know, we can go out there and say, hey, we need this, and we'll have thousands of people banging on our doors. But the fact of the matter is, in the end, we'll end up in what could be called an architect, where we end up with the activity, but we don't end up with any of the economic benefits. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's take this initiative that we're talking about here. Let's start to move forward with these bold visions of growth centers and economic centers for our Cape Cod. Let's start to embrace some of the solutions to crises that are facing our global world and make Cape Cod a leader in these areas. Because I will tell you something, Cape Cod is not alone. As a matter of fact, if you were to take Economic Summit and strike out Cape Cod and the island, then you could plug in almost any coastal community around the nation, and every one of those coastal communities is suffering from exactly the same issue. Guess what? They're also looking for the answers to those crises. So, Paul, as you said, the Chinese symbol for opportunity is this and before. The key here is to take that challenge, internalize it, and make it happen in a way that makes us stronger and more self-sufficient.
Thanks for sharing that, Ryan. Yes, Matt.
I think that's a great point. And what you said, keeping it local or starting it locally. I think more people need to do things at the grassroots level. I think more people need to, whether it's join committees, get involved, start their own committees. I was one of the, I came onto the Wealthy Oyster Fest committee. We call ourselves SPAT. And that organization has, if anybody's been to the festival, is absolutely huge now. And I was blown away by what really 6 or 7 of us started and what it's turned into. But what that's become is a vehicle for the local community, really specifically designed for Wellfleet Oysters to brand themselves on a national level, to get the Wellfleet Oyster name out there, to help the local economy, to sell those oysters to a larger market. Incidentally, that didn't really happen. Something else happened. We ended up having a huge festival and set up, our shucking champion on to the worlds, and so we had this great recognition. But the Wellfleet Oyster itself still hasn't really gained the notoriety that we want. But the point is, we need to do it locally. We need to be active. We need to do things, not just wait for government to get things done. And I think that it's extremely important that regulations are in place and bylaws are set up. Those are the vehicles, but we're the ones that have to make things happen.
Other questions?
Yes, my name's Steve Buckley. I'm from Chatham. And election season's not over yet. We're having a special election in January for a vacancy on the Board of Selectmen. And I'm running again for that. But one of the reasons I'm running is not for the big bucks, which is like $2,000 a year. Is the idea that I can use some of the government experience that I used got when I was working in Washington and the Chesapeake Bay Area. Is that, and I wanted to connect 2 dots, observations that I've been online on the internet for about 20 years, and it took a long time in those early years for people who, in the early 90s, to explain to other people what this phenomenon was, what the capabilities were, the idea that you could create a group of people who I've never met online and have group conversations and network and have synergy. The idea that, oh, here's somebody doing something, I'm doing something like that, and here's another person, and kids call it Facebook, but you didn't have to have Facebook. It's simple email. And I'm glad to see that Cape Cod Focus is doing something. Hopefully it'll be a platform for that synergy where we can do it. And technologically, of course, it will help to make the broadband, and it can do more bells and whistles and so forth. But part of it is in people's heads. And I think Larry was talking about this, the idea that older people tend to think old. You don't have to fall into that trap. But as we all know, there's a general tendency, at least, once you get older, to do things in the old way. And why do we have to change? And why do we have to do this? Can't you wait until I die? That type of, why are we in such a hurry to go this way? So the idea is that really we have to overcome, or at least recognize the fact that some people, and they can be young people too, that's the way we always did it. Why do we have to change? Can't we just keep doing the same thing we always did? Because the reason would be because we're going to keep getting the same thing we always got. So the idea that if towns can use, if we can create some environment where it's attractive, little carrots and sticks, or mostly carrots, where towns can share resources. I find it very rarely in Chatham government, and it's probably the same on Harwich and other places too, that we say, gee, what are they doing in other parts of Cape Cod? Almost never. It's like we have to invent everything all over again. And I try to point it out to them that there's thousands of towns that are wrestling out across the country that are wrestling with the very same things. I mean, the coastal communities in particular. We can use the internet now to find out what they're doing. We don't have to start from scratch all over. Somebody's already solved many of these problems, or at least part of the puzzle, for us. We just have to be open-minded enough to be able to go out there and find those things. So I just wanted to point out that a lot of these are connected.
Thank you for that, because it's a matter of, part of Cape Cod Focus mission is to bring these people together that can make things happen, and to share that information where that will happen.
Peter?
Dan has a comment on that, I'm sure. Dan, I'm sorry. Somebody else?
Thanks. Hi, Stephanie Cox from Representative Turner's office. 2 things. I just want to quickly comment on the regionalization issue. The representative and I have sat down at the secretary level to talk about this issue that the state really does, the administration really does want to pursue. And I can say that we definitely do not want to follow the AD's lead. They're going to have kids traveling hours on the bus, and the outside imposed is definitely not the point. One of the things we talked about, definitely with the state's finances being the way that they are, there's not going to be too many candidates, but we want to try to avoid the disincentives that were created at the last round of regionalization and the two equity. So one of the things that municipalities, people on boards, really need to start talking about is what are the disincentives we want to avoid, and what do we really need, because the Department of Education is pursuing this. They are going to come down to the Cape, they are going to sit down with municipalities and have a conversation. I think for the first time in a long time, the department's going to be really, they're going to have their ears open. So we need to be prepared to give them strong answers. The second thing I just wanted to actually comment and have a question about is, I am one of those young people who moved off the Cape and came back, and definitely there's the social issues, the housing issues, those are all associated problems that I think stem from the jobs issue. And what I wonder about is, if we are continuing to be based in tourism, in second homes, and in the retirement community, that sort of based economy, we have those high-skilled blue-collar jobs being focused on construction. We're heading towards a place where it's not necessarily sustainable. There's only so much buildable land, and when we have an economic downturn, obviously we're going to send more than the rest of the state. So how can we focus, how can we bring more industry, different types of industry onto the Cape? When I worked for the Tech Council, we really try to focus on bringing technology jobs here, or foster them here. And the problem that we always ran into was, once a technology company, or any type of company other than something that's tourist-based, rose to a level of medium to large size, they get an offer from a company in Texas or wherever, and get bought out, and they move their business on the Cape. So how do we come up with zoning and permitting incentives and any sort of contract that we can come up with to incentivize staying here for 15, 20, 25 years?
Well, thanks for sharing those thoughts. One of my thoughts was where's our legislative branch in this? And Bill Zammer has a comment. And I know Dan Geller had a comment, and we're almost ready to wrap up. So
I'll go quick. I wanted to congratulate the Cape Cod Focus Group for a big success. I read last week that the median household price in Massachusetts went down from its peak of $350 to $280.
We've been working on that.
So great job there. That's going to help the housing market. Another one I'd recommend for housing, because I think there's two sides to this, as Peter Francis pointed out. The real problem is this crazy out-of-whack ratio of median home price to median household income, which is 6 to 1 on Cape Cod. That's the fundamental problem when you get down to it. And so seeing that median home price go down is actually a good thing. Sorry, but that's true. Another one on housing I'd suggest is multi-generational homes. The comment that Bill made about that student who says, my grandparents all live down there. Well, let's find a way for multi-generational home zoning as well. It's a trend actually that's starting to take on in the rest of the country. It's a good thing to have those grandparents with those children and their grandchildren together in one home in two somewhat isolated sections of the home. So that's a good thing. But the other side of the coin is this job creation and opportunity that everyone's talking about. And I think they should be treated equally as important to make the difference here on the Cape Cod. One of the things that the Congress is talking about doing right now is an infrastructure, really a jobs program as an incentive that they're going to do probably in the first of the year, about $300 billion. I'd encourage you to write to your Congress people and senators to say that anything that they do in that area should do more than just create temporary labor jobs, putting in roads and bridges. Include on that the 1% extra in the charge of putting in fiber optic cable along that road, the conduit that's necessary, because those are the future jobs, and that's really where the Cape needs to go. If you're going to have those kinds of nice, clean jobs like back office in Harwich, you have to support the infrastructure to go along with it. There was a summit recently down in Hyannis 2 weeks ago, so Cape Cod Summit, to talk about economics again, but there were a lot of vendors and things there. And they had two presentations, one from back office and combined David Kirkpatrick from Plymouth Rock Studios, which is going in over Plymouth. And they asked them, what were two of the challenges, what's the major challenge that your companies face? And they said, bandwidth. They both said that as a requirement for not only their businesses on site at the location, but for their employees who will work largely from home and need to be able to communicate. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for your efforts to get Cape Cod wired. We'll look back one day and really applaud your efforts. Thank you. Bill Zammer, did you have?
I'd just like to address the issue that the young lady brought about jobs. The Cape Cod Chamber, we're very positive about things. And in fact, we're looking to attract young people, and there are jobs. The governor and Senator Murray and Bravo Leary are going to be at Woods Hole, Oceanographic, and MBL in Woods Hole on Monday, giving MBL $10 million towards life sciences, which is only the first of $100 million that's also going to Woods Hole. These are very, very good jobs, and there's spin-off jobs coming from various companies who look to want to associate with that. So we keep hearing this thing about no good jobs on the Cape Cod, and we're tourism-based. But your chamber is working diligently with those groups to bring in jobs, and I just think that we've got to highlight a lot more of that. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you, Bill. I think we're just about ready to wrap up. I don't know if we have one more question. I see somebody's raising their hand there, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
But as a former landlord, I can tell you that the Massachusetts laws for people trying to rent a spot is very discouraging. I would never rent something that I owned again. So this is a discouragement. You said, Bill, that the housing needs to come from the private sector, and it's not going to come because the laws are very discouraging if you want to rent your home to somebody.
Thank you for that comment. We have one more comment. All right, Steve, you going to wrap up?
Actually, in an attempt to kind of bring this
please
session to a close, I'd first of all like to thank everyone who's still here, and hope you've thought the time here this was well spent. Just a couple of thoughts. The gentleman from Chatham spoke about what he hopes and what we all hope this new website will bring. It's something I did want to just quickly say. We've got a lot of successful efforts on the Cape. We've heard some of them. We need to document, we need to celebrate, we need to bring focus and attention on those. We've got an awful lot of initiatives, too, that are going on that I also think people need to know about. And we need to know about what we can do to help them get that done. In the panel that Sheila Vanderhoff was on, and Robin, they spoke to the realities of it's nice to have good ideas and things that are rational and logical and need to be done. It's another thing to be on the firing line trying to get them done. And one of the things I hope that Cape Cod Focus and its members can do is to provide some political cover, some accountability, and support that Bill Doherty asked for. I think you said, Bill, I hope we get some support and backup from business and others. I can assure you on this Cape Cod Focus group, yes, it's some of the same 10 people, it's actually about 20 and still growing a little, are a lot of type A's, very successful people who want to help, don't have a lot of time, but do have a fair amount of influence and are willing to step forward as we all want to do to help make Cape Cod continue to be a vital, wonderful place in which to live. Again, Wendy, I don't know if, do you have some final comments? Gary? Just want to thank everybody for participating, for our panelists, for our outside speakers, to Wendy and great staff at the Chamber for helping support this, and for all of you for being with us this morning. Thanks very much.